I'm Matt Leininger of the Center for Democracy and Innovation. You'll also be hearing from my colleague, Benita Duran, who works at the center, is also the Senior Director for Equity and Engagement at the National Civic League. You'll be hearing then also from Nick Vlahos, our colleague, who is a Deputy Director of the Center for Democracy and Innovation. You can click on that next slide there, Nick. And then we also have, there we go. We also have our wonderful commentators who've been very gracious to join us today and give us their expertise. Carolyn Coleman, who is Executive Director and CEO of the League of California Cities, formerly with the National League of Cities. Carolyn is also a board member for the National Civic League. Carolyn, thank you very much for joining us. We're also lucky to have as a commentator Tracy Kalunga, who is a Civic Engagement Practice Director at the Bloomberg Center for Public Innovation at Johns Hopkins University, and has a lot of experience with this, not only in her current role, but also as a person working in local government in Long Beach, California. So those are the people you're going to be hearing from. And let me just give you the sense of the overall flow here, where you have a little bit of overview to tell you a bit more about the project, a few kind of slides, some of the things we've been learning about the challenge of public meetings and trying to upgrade them. We're going to talk about some of the changes that we're suggesting overall to communities that they use within the meetings themselves. And then we'll have another set of slides about changes to things that you can be doing going into meetings, out of meetings, concurrently with meetings, all those sorts of things. And I think at this point, Nick, is the next slide is, yes, Benita, take it away.
Yeah, hey, thanks, Matt. So the work of the National Civic League is centered around the Model City Charter. So the governance issues of cities is what we have spent a lot of time on in the work of National Civic League. We pay attention to what happens in public meetings. So let's work with the official definition of public meetings. And what we mean by that are meetings that are open to the public, where elected and appointed officials are present and where policy decisions are being made. Next slide. And what we find in these official public meetings that they can be not so good and they can be better, right? Those bad public meetings have low public trust and confidence in government. They can be very frustrating. They can also lead to really a sense of inequity, because these meetings may not be representative of the communities affected by policies. Better public meetings are those that have proven skills and tools and practices that can ensure civil, productive dialogue. And these practices can adopt practices that make these public meetings more satisfying in the experience and really bring about more thoughtful and engaging dialogue between the community and elected officials. Next slide. And why do we care about it? Why did we get engaged in something like this? Well, at the center, our backgrounds, the work that we have done has been in public arenas. Between the three of us, we've done a lot of work with cities and communities, and we've been at the dais, at the microphone. We've been involved in communities in a lot of different ways, and we've engaged with communities in these conversations about meetings. We've participated in many good, back up to the other slide. We participated in many of these forms of engagement, in person, in hybrid meetings, in deliberative meetings. They matter, right? And we've cared about how people have been in these conversations. What we realize is that you can't just innovate by changing the format or the time that public comment happens. You can't reduce 3 minutes to 2 minutes and make it a more meaningful exchange. We really have to think about how those ongoing interactions happen between citizens and government. Next slide. And so what we learned about in our process is there's really a difference between being heard and being listened to. And it's not just conceding to the most prominent voices in the room. It's really a very uncomfortable experience when you're at that mic, whatever side you're on, right? And it's often a very foreign experience for many people. And it's a very intimidating experience, is what we've heard from many people who have that experience for the first time in trying to engage with their local government. So what we are interested in is how people respond to that. How can we better engage with folks in that kind of conversation? Next slide. We heard from elected officials, we heard from the staff, city managers, community engagement specialists in cities, and we heard from the community at large that people really do want to explore better ways to engage. There really is confusion about when, not just where, issues are being discussed. There's concern about safety and security, about why and how and when, and the costs of engagement. And it's a common refrain that we hear, that we can't just keep doing it like this, that life is too short. And who wants the aggravation of a process that really doesn't work? There's a lot at stake here, and we want to keep working at trying to make it better. Next slide. And so what we realized is that this is really a bigger issue than we thought when we took this on. Change really isn't easy. And even though many people see the need to change, there are a lot of constraints that we still have to work within, and we have to work with a very conscious effort to make sure that we are taking into account many elements, issues of elections, issues of transitions of staff, issues of crises that communities are facing at every turn, the politics of environments, timing, communications, all these things play into the process. We have people on our conversation today who have great experiences and perspectives across the country. And so I want to turn to Carolyn and to Tracy to get your views of this. Give us some thoughts to share in this moment of time.
Benita, hi. Benita, hi. Thank you so much for the presentation, and Matt and Nick, and really to the entire team. Thank you for the opportunity for me to share just my own perspective on this important issue that we're all facing today. As Matt said, by way of introduction, Carolyn Coleman, the Executive Director of the League of California Cities. I have also served at the federal level at the National League of Cities, but before that, and near and dear to my heart, I served in local government in Indianapolis for a number of years. So for better or worse, I've had quite a bit of experience with public meetings, some that went great and some that needed a little more work. So this is definitely an important project. I just want to underscore, Benita, your concept of this desire for change. And I'd like to think that's really about what's been a mandate for change in terms of our public meetings. Certainly much of the mandate brought on by the pandemic and what we experienced when we were forced really to go remote. But the reality was that government still needed to function, and we needed to find productive ways to do that. Well, now that we've returned to normal, we're all sort of at the local level, some of us sorting through what parts of the hybrid environment do we keep, what parts of that don't work so well. So we find ourselves, as we're striving for better meetings, also trying to take the best of that experience as we move forward. And that includes, in some cases, making changes to laws that allow us to govern in a more flexible, more hybrid manner, so that we do have greater access by the public, which is really one of the benefits of the pandemic, and the way we changed how we govern that I think has been so productive, and we certainly want to keep that going forward. But as you indicated, it's a bigger change maybe in some ways than we realized. Coupled with the changes in how we conduct our meetings, we also have to face the reality of a rise in incivility as a part of that process. And you talked about security concerns, and we certainly are seeing those rise in our cities in California. Just yesterday, I had a mayor reach out to me about anti-Semitic and racist language that came in through public comment as a part of their meeting. And we're struggling with how to maintain the public comment in that space, but also to minimize speech that is and can be disruptive to the goals of that meeting. We also have seen the increase in protest, not only at elected officials' personal homes, but also city staff as a result of the increase in discourse. So as we strive to be more inclusive in our governing, we also have to face some of the consequences of doing that. Because I think you know, we're talking about democracy here, and democracy that works for our cities and works for our country. But we're also seeing more and more resignations by public servants, because for them too, it has become too much and too large a burden to bear to govern in this environment. So they're choosing not to run. I like to think, and I think we all agree, that good government needs good people. So I appreciate that this project is helping us wrestle with and struggle with these concepts, so that we can, as we move forward in a new world, have better and more productive and inclusive public meetings. And so with that, Benita, I'll turn it back over to you. Again, thank you for the opportunity to share.
Tracy?
Yes, thank you, Benita, and thank you, team. So honored to be here and honored to go just after Carolyn Coleman, who I've admired for many years in her work across the country. Tracy Kolunga here at the Bloomberg Center for Public Innovation. My team and I lead all of the civic engagement training for cities of service, which are mayors and cities who've signed on to increasing meaningful civic engagement in their work with cities. And, you know, a couple of things came to mind as Benita was sharing and Carolyn was sharing about, you know, what can we look for in the future? What's innovative? What's different? How can we start to meet people where they are? One of the first things that came to mind when I saw this work was an old saying, managing by walking around. So this is like an old concept of management, but really in a way, when people come to city council meetings, again, I worked in Long Beach, California for 16 years, most recently as Chief Innovation Officer 2 years ago, just before I came over to Johns Hopkins University. And one of the things that my team and I did really well is we welcomed people. They would come for council presentations or to speak on a particular agenda item. Management by walking around, go and welcome people. We're so happy you're here at the city council meeting. You know, shake hands, high five. Even if you know the person, I'm Latina, we like to hug, you know, and just creating a welcoming environment really changes the dynamic. So what would it look like if mayor, council, or department heads came out and, you know, welcomed people as they were showing up to council meetings, really changing that atmosphere. Another piece of that is all you introverts on this call are probably like, what are you talking about, Tracy? I don't want to get out of my seat and say hi to people. Well, guess what? You probably have extrovert staff members who, like me, love to meet people, and there isn't a friend that I haven't met. So that's another thing to think about, is who are your staff members who are just natural extroverts that you can say, hey, let's welcome our constituents, let's welcome the community, and have them feel, again, a welcoming environment. Another thing to think about, point 2, is having these public meetings outside in the community. So our current mayor, Rex Richardson of Long Beach, California, and he's the former vice mayor. I've worked with him for many years. One thing he institutionalized when he was vice mayor were public meetings out in the community. And so we hosted city council meetings, 9 of them, in each council district. Yes, it was a burden for staff, but I'll tell you what, the community up in North Long Beach, they were so grateful. They, you know, that the people from downtown came up to North Long Beach, hosted a council meeting for several hours. There was community input, community engagement. Kids were outside playing at the playground right outside of the community center. And it really had a different feel to that meeting. And so because of those lessons learned, the city of Long Beach now hosts all their budget meetings out in the community. So as opposed to coming downtown to City Hall and finding a hard time parking or paying for parking, they actually move the budget meetings around to all the different 9 council districts. And again, this really changed the dynamic of allowing community people to come. A third piece to think about is in these external public meetings, how can you provide language interpretation and maybe a World Cafe style? So we're going to drop in the chat some civic engagement techniques But a World Cafe style is sitting at round tables and having a conversation on specific topics. For instance, in Long Beach, like many cities across the country, our unhoused neighbors is a high, conversation that we're having about how do we address housing affordability. So at each round table, you can have different discussions, and then people can rotate to different tables. Maybe the table over on the other side of the room is focused on public safety, but every 15 minutes kind of moving around the room, so you have an opportunity to talk with elected officials, share your ideas, and again, really create an environment that's welcoming to this public discourse. So thank you for letting me share.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. And I just want to point out in the chat, people are already asking questions and putting in resources. A lot of the things that Carolyn and Tracy were just talking about, we posted in the chat. Also, and some people have brought up already open meetings laws. Nick is going to talk about that in just a second. I also want to kind of chime in on one of the things that Benita was saying, which is that, those quotes that you saw were from people we have interviewed in the different cities we've been working, and that we interviewed, elected officials, staff, other, community members, and so on. And as we found, a lot of people said we need to change things as far as how our public meetings work. It was also very common for them to say, but those other people let us do it. The elected official would say, well, yeah, we know we need to change this, but the community will be up in arms if we do it. Community members said, oh, we want to change things, but the electeds or the staff won't let us. So there's this kind of common thing of like, okay, yes, we want to change, but there's some of that the other group, is holding us back. And that, and of course, that's a kind of a complicated thing. Sometimes you ask people about change and they say yes, even though maybe they don't, but still, I think that there's more fear of backlash or opposition from other groups than may actually be the case. Nick, why don't you take it away?
Great, thanks. So Matt touched a little bit upon some of the process that we've been undertaking. And so here's just a little infographic about our community engaged research project. So we're working with 3 pilot communities, which I'll touch upon in a second, but we're conducting a civic infrastructure scan, which is essentially doing qualitative research on the ground with various stakeholders, having conversations with media, academics, internal staff, residents, nonprofit organizations, and the like. And then part of that also is us implementing what we call a civic engagement scorecard. So we're allowing the public to quickly rate their experiences at public meetings. And it's a quick tool, almost like a 90-second Yelp, where you get to provide an opportunity on how they're experiencing it, and some opportunities of what's worked and what potentially needs to be changed. And Matt's going to touch upon that a little bit later in the slides as well. From this, we're working really closely with an internal team to sort of think through the types of recommendations that we want to propose to the communities, and then presenting these and working with community members to innovate these as well. And so we're sort of at that stage now where we produce these scanned draft reports, and now we're working towards recommendations, and we'll be sharing a lot more of this in the coming months of just exactly what these communities are going to be implementing in terms of the recommendations. But we touch upon one of these ideas in the next couple of slides, which is obviously replacing the mic with the 3 minutes at the mic with deliberation. So the communities that we're working with is the city of Boulder, Colorado, specifically their city council, Fayetteville, North Carolina, specifically 2 boards and commissions, which is their Community Police Advisory Board and their Youth Fayetteville Next Commission. And we're working with a school board in Mesa, Arizona. So the interesting thing about this is that, by working with these 3 different types of official meetings, it's different settings provide different sorts of understandings, not only of different contexts in different cities, different areas and regions of the country, but an appreciation of how different institutional bodies grapple with engagement. So one of the common things that, and is mentioned by Benita in the quotes, is that, each community has their own nuanced challenges, but they're all dealing with a core theme that we've heard, which is, what does it take for people to be and to feel heard in the context of an official meeting? And so, we've been really thinking through about, what this means from the resident point of view, from an elected and staff point of view. And what we found through our conversations is that on both sides, they struggle, especially with public comment period. So a specific part of the agenda where people go up to a mic, they treat it very cathartically. It can now become, an opportunity right now to cause serious problems and polarization. And it's a frustrating part on behalf of the public because they don't feel heard, even though it is their only opportunity to speak. And then on behalf of the electeds, they feel it's a rather frustrating experience because there is a tendency for a lot of the people to show up to be the same group of people that are attending these things. And so we're thinking a little bit more about, how can we insert public deliberation into an official setting? And one of the ways to do it, which Tracy touched upon, is World Cafe style. How can we redesign a space in the context of official council to be more deliberative with small groups on an issue and to provide input into a subject or an issue on an agenda? And so we're finding that this is a really interesting thing because we hear, at least in the participatory and deliberative space, thinking about these things outside of the context of a city council. But can you imagine a city council? Like, just imagine them breaking out into conversation amongst each other with residents and participants and how that dynamic might shift. And so the big question there is like, how do we make that happen? Can we even actualize that? What would be the strengths and the weaknesses of trying to implement that? How can we insert, asynchronous participation into that as well? So part of this really is, and this is the groundwork, is thinking about the laws, right? And there is really a generalization, and I think it's a fair point, but the law is sort of allergic to innovation. But what we found in our research is that this is really contextual, based off of states, based off of different places. So if you look very carefully at an open meetings law, if you look at the rules of procedure and a city charter, we found a broadness in interpretation. And in fact, no mention, and from what I can see, that there is no denial of the ability to shift the way that a meeting happens, which means you don't have to have it with 3 minutes at a microphone. So the bigger question then that we have is, how do we actually, think about keeping within the parameters of the law, and transforming the way things happen so that it still works within the system and we can actually have some form of a conversation. And so part of this is, recognizing that there are still number one is thinking through an agenda. What are the things on the agenda that can be altered? Public comments can be altered. Some quasi-judicial matters have to be dealt with 3 minutes at a mic. There are opportunities here to have discussions, but you have to make sure that people who provide comments go on official record. So how do we do this at a round table? What are the ways to document official commenting, within that context? And part of this is also thinking about, how do we get the electeds involved directly in a conversation, not just a one-way communication on a microphone, for example, but actually having a conversation on a topic and an issue. So as we've mentioned, this is the type of common thing that many people are familiar with World Cafes or deliberative roundtables or mini publics of the sort. The idea here is to create norms for engagement. It's not a free fall. We want to make sure that we're dispersing, participation in a diverse way and a process for summarizing and sharing ideas and reporting back into that context. So in the end, in thinking about this, like, why might this be better and why might not it be enough? So what we're arguing, and to be fair, there is a good amount of academic research on this, that deliberative discussions are better in terms of producing more informed input. We're claiming that it can actually lead to, people feeling heard. In this context, it might actually alter the opportunity for how people provide input by having them in conversation so that single actors aren't hijacking entire processes. But on the flip side, people don't feel like they're completely being blanked off, while they're providing input on a microphone, and no elected officials are actually responding to them. So this gets everybody on a level playing field in some ways. But why might it not be enough? Because, it might still just be the same people in the room that show up, the same 7, 10, 15 people. How do we get more people in? Then there's the question of then doing more outreach, not just simply participating internally, but how do we draw more conversations externally into this? But then, also why it might not be enough is, it depends on the way that this is implemented. One thing that we are advocating for is a phased approach. And the phased approach might be starting with a pilot, which I mentioned in the chat, say doing a study session. Study session really is an ample opportunity to dive deeper into a subject because that's what it's meant for. But these study sessions aren't necessarily open to the public. Why not create that as the fodder for an opportunity to pilot these projects and see if you can move into the official settings? Maybe this helps draw political will into the process by thinking about how to phase things in and sequentially do that. I'm going to ask now again, Tracy and Carolyn to weigh in on what their thoughts are on this.
Great, wonderful. Well, I'm excited, like these photos and these bullet points, it's just like, it's getting me excited to think about how do we get people in that room? If we're going to have a different public meeting, how are we going to get people there? So again, having public meetings out in the community, as I mentioned earlier, is a method. But there's a couple other things you can do in advance, knock and talks. So one of the things when we were developing the City of Long Beach violence prevention policy, everybody in the city, north, south, east, and west, care about violence prevention. And so when each area of the city where we would host, let's say again in north, south, east, or west, we would have a public meeting. Prior to that public meeting, me and all the civic engagement outreach workers would walk door to door. And again, you may have CDBG funded staff that specifically do outreach, or in your community development department. If not, can you partner with Parks and Rec or library staff who are already in that community? And we knocked on 500 doors and we gave them a flyer in English and Spanish. And we said, we are hosting a community meeting this Saturday. We're developing the city's violence prevention plan policy. We'd love for you to come and join us. Bring your family, bring your kids, bring the youth. And, a lot of times people would say, okay, I'll be there. This is great. Some people would say, I work Saturday, I can't make it. And so then we had a cheat sheet that said, okay, well, since we're here, can we ask you a few questions? So the same questions we were going to ask in that World Cafe public meeting, if someone told us they couldn't make it on the spot, 5 minutes or less, can you tell us some of your concerns in the community? What are some ideas you have for solutions? And sometimes those would end up being longer conversations, but for the most part, it was more about that outreach, or I should say in reach, to invite people to come to our public meeting. So knock and talks is a strategy. A second strategy is a facilitator's guide. So one of the things that we teach, we run the Love Your Block grant program. I'm going to make a shameless plug. Cities across the US can apply for this grant, 2-year grant program. We teach you civic deliberation. We put a fellow and a Vista in City Hall with you to work alongside you to focus on your most disinvested neighborhoods. One of the things we teach is this facilitator's guide. So if you're going to host a public meeting, you do the knock and talk, but then you're going to have your public meeting. It's important that each person at the round table, each facilitator at each round table is properly trained. So we do have a facilitator's guide that we provide, and every facilitator goes through the training. I recommend it's the morning of the public meeting or an hour and a half prior to the public meeting, so you don't have to create a separate meeting for everyone. But people can the facilitators show up and you train them on how to deliver this facilitation model at that public meeting. You're there on site to help answer any questions. And again, you want to choose extroverts. You want to choose some of your natural leaders in City Hall who can facilitate a really healthy dialogue. And then the third and last but not least is DJ and food. So in El Paso, Texas, they host public meetings, and they, Christian over there in El Paso, he makes sure there's always a DJ and there's always food and balloons. And he's like, and you're just like, Tracy, we're City Hall. We can't provide food. You're probably right. But did you know your local Starbucks will donate coffee and pastries for your public meeting? Maybe there's a small business that's been wanting to get the word out about their new Peruvian menu. Invite your small businesses to pro bono provide food at your public meeting as a way to promote local business. All right, Carolyn, over to you.
Thank you, Tracy. And Matt, I love the comment about democracy needing more DJs. It's probably not such a bad idea. You know, listening, Nick, to your comments and your presentation, I sat here and I think, where were you when I was in local government 20 years ago? I could have used many of these strategies. I really like this notion of going out into the community and meeting our residents where they are, and adapting the setup of a room so that we've set a level playing field when it comes to the power structure, right? When you walk into city council meetings, when you walk into state house office committee meeting rooms, it's very evident where the power is sitting. So I really like this notion of round tables, and everyone gets a voice at that table. The one thought I had, though, in terms of those extreme voices that can sometimes dominate meetings, because they sometimes seem to be the ones who can make those meetings, is even when we bring in more diverse voices that's important to the process, I think it's important to plan for the impact of social media, because an extreme person can easily still hijack the narrative, even though they may or may not have been in that meeting. So I would just add to this thought somewhere, when we think about innovation and how we conduct these public meetings, it's important to have a media strategy, and importantly, a social media strategy.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Sure. Well, I think some of what you just said kind of points to the next thing we wanted to talk about, which is all the things that are happening in the community that could be, and usually are not, but could be supportive of better public meetings. And these are all the other ways that people are interacting with one another in their neighborhoods, their homeowners groups, their parent councils at schools, you know, the boards and commissions that are official bodies of the city. You know, those groups generally in most communities are having a hard time. I mean, there's a common problem with many of them, which is that they're not engaging that many of their peers. And so that has a problem in the sense that, you know, those are the kinds of groups that you would want to be relying on to bring more people to the table, and to bring more people into the public conversation generally on social media, as well as kind of at meetings. Because, you know, part of the key of kind of keeping a particular person from drowning, from kind of dominating, is by kind of enlarging the crowd, you know, getting more people into the circle. So you would want to have all these other sorts of groups in the community helping you do that, bringing people into public life in various ways. And also the key often to helping you understand, if you're elected official or staff, helping you understand just exactly how many people feel a certain way. You know, somebody comes to a public meeting and they say, people in my neighborhood think this, and you're sitting there thinking, really? I don't know. Is this one person or a few people, or is it in fact something that's broadly shared? So this kind of broader infrastructure that communities often lack, this kind of ground floor of democracy, is something that's really vital to think about, in addition to changing the way that the actual meetings operate. And part of the opportunity here is to use some of the tools that we didn't have 20 years ago or more to kind of support that kind of work. I mean, there's lots of things, whether they're kind of online polling tools like Mentimeter, or texting enabled tools, texting platforms, basically things you can give people as they're going into one of those meetings, kind of loaded up with some information, some questions, some opportunities for people to give input, some way of kind of creating more two-way interaction between this meeting that's happening maybe on the other side of town, in a space people are more comfortable in, and they're more willing to go to that space. But it's still, you can have more of a two-way interaction with them using some of the tools we have. So that's an important thing, that it's not all that complicated. And I mean, I think one of the things that officials and staff understandably recoil from is, geez, you know, you're asking me not only to change public meetings and how government works, you're also asking me to change how the neighborhood groups work. Well, in fact, you know, that's, if you can do it, and there's some fairly, you know, cost-effective, time-effective ways to do it, that makes the rest of your job so much easier, because you've got more people paying attention, you got a more representative set of people giving you inputs and input ideas, and it's, you know, it's just, you're making the community better in so many other ways. Another way that you know that people use to kind of get a much larger set of people out is to kind of focus on a specific issue for a particular period of time. You know, we know that the biggest issue on city council's plate this you know, year is going to be housing affordability, or, you know, whatever it is. And so doing a kind of specific set of activities that kind of flow into the official public meetings on that issue that you know people care about, and you know that the council is going to be, or the school board is going to be acting on. Another thing to be doing and that we've been experimenting with in the course of this project, is to give people a chance to rate their meetings. You know, if you want to do something better, you want to know if people like it as you try and do things. And so we have this thing called the Civic Engagement Scorecard that we've been adapting for the communities in the project. This is the flyer you see on the right is from Boulder, their use of the scorecard. And this is a thing that we are able to provide for communities very easily. So if you're interested in doing something like this, just let us know. But basically, it gives people a chance to say, yes, this was a good meeting. No, it wasn't. It was somewhere in between. It would be better if it did this or that. You see, these are just some sample, responses that we got from one use of the scorecard. But it also, the other thing about the scorecard is it allows people to talk about their community general. How do they feel informed in general? Do they feel connected to others? Do they feel they have a meaningful say in decisions that they care about? Do they feel like their volunteerism and service is supported and honored in the way that, as Tracy was describing, in the way that it happens with Love Your Block and some of the other great cities of service projects? So those 4 elements of citizenship, information, connectedness, being part of decision making, and volunteerism, those are 4 tremendously important dimensions of citizenship. Communities that have more of those things are better off in all kinds of ways. And so and that's kind of the ultimate impact you're hoping to have through all the legislation you're doing, through the public meetings, all the other kinds of things that your community is doing. So having some way of kind of rating that, measuring it on an ongoing basis, we think could be really important for people. So let's go to the next one and talk about some of the digital strategies. So one of the common things that we find, especially in the course of this project, is we've been looking at lots of digital tools that cities and school systems are using. And one thing that we're finding with them is a lot of them are really kind of focused on the immediate needs of the city. I want input on this. I need ideas on that. And that's good, but the platforms are kind of underutilized because they're not providing on other things that the community cares about. And they're not providing ways for people to talk to each other in a kind of an engaging sort of way, or know where people are. So one of the things that I think may be interesting to kind of helpful to look at is are these tools that we're using, and some of them you're paying money for, are they actually really things that people want to use, or are they simply were they kind of created as a way of automating some of the interactions that aren't working already as far as the official public meetings? For surveys, one thing we found with surveys is cities often spend a lot of time and money on surveys. And one thing that surveys don't generally do is maintain a relationship with the people being surveyed. It's usually just like a snapshot, one point in time. What do you think about these issues? And the problem with that is that, first of all, the people being surveyed usually don't know how you're going to use the results. Even when you try as much as you can to kind of put the word out to the community, this was the survey, here's how we acted as a school board or as a city council on the basis of that, often people just don't know. And so that's part of the problem. And also the other problem is that you can't then go back to them. Okay, we surveyed you, we found, you said, your top issue this year was going to be X. We worked on that. We've now realized there are 3 different options for doing X. What do you think of these 3 things? So one thing that a lot of communities are doing is creating these survey panels. Be Heard Philly in Philadelphia is one of the first examples. Be Heard Charlottesville is another one. But basically what you're doing there is giving people a chance not just to be surveyed once, but to say, okay, yeah, I'm willing to be surveyed and get surveys from you, twice a year, once a month or whatever, and on these sorts of issues. So basically the people being surveyed get to choose the issues, the frequency, all those sorts of things. And then, but they also give you their demographic information, and they're with you over the long haul. So you can go back to them. They're in they're in the loop. You know who they are. You know how representative the sample is. You can kind of adjust for that as a social scientist would. But basically, you're kind of able to keep this relationship with people, not only to kind of go back to them with other questions in the future, but also to invite them to other sorts of engagement opportunities like public meetings. And then I think I talked a bit about the hybrid strategies, but having things that people can use that are either texting based or web based that allow them to kind of interact with you even in remote locations and in other points of time. That's really helpful as far as spreading your conversation farther into the community. So there's maybe 1 or 2 more here. Oh, okay. So we already talked about fun a little bit. DJs already were mentioned, and some of the examples we got from Tracy and Carolyn, kind of fun ways more enjoyable ways for people to be engaged, and that not always in the context of the official city council or school board meeting itself, but it could be something that leads into that or comes out at the end of it or so on. And there's certainly other things you can do in the community. Using the arts as well. One thing that we found in this process was this really interesting participatory theater project called City Council, which is essentially what it does is basically these people kind of use transcripts from the city council or school board meetings and have people act them out. It's this amazing project, and click the link if you want to see more about it. But it's a very thought-provoking, fun way for people to actually really grapple with, here's how we want our institutions to function, here's how we want people in government or people in the school system to interact. Elevating the voices of young people, another really important thing that can really have an impact on other sorts of things that you're doing. When you have younger people involved, the older people tend to behave better, for one thing, we found. And also just, when you have young people involved, that they usually bring out lots of other people. When you have a multi-generational activity or meeting or process or whatever, all kinds of people of all generations are more likely to take part. And of course, the creativity that you can kind of tap into by getting young people and adults together to kind of think about how to solve problems is really helpful. Another thing that's one more thing is citizen assemblies and other kinds of really intensive processes. I think Nick may have mentioned those earlier on, but basically these are processes which are kind of sortitional, meaning that you kind of get a random sample somehow, a representative sample of your community to take part, and they spend a lot of time learning and talking to each other, deliberating about an issue, and then issuing some recommendations for a school board or city council or some other body. Those things they're bulkier, they take more work to organize, but they're also tremendously informed, and they tend to generate really positive recommendations that participants tend to like them a lot. And I think also the communications appeal of them. People like this idea, kind of like jury service, people who are just randomly selected peers, who are getting a chance to be part of decision making. That kind of message is something that is helpful for getting people interested in all kinds of issues and decisions being taken up by elected bodies. So overall, thinking about 4 things when you're trying to improve public meetings. 1, kind of the design of the agendas and the processes, the outreach, how are you going to get people to the table and interact with people even if they can't come to the table? What are the ways in which these opportunities can be gratifying to people so that they actually feel and are heard? And also, of course, the laws. What are the opportunities you have within your state, within your city charter, within your ordinances to do some innovation? In general, we found, as we've kind of been doing this work on this project, some things that we have learned in other projects as well, is that to do it well, you need a strong team. There's a local team that has buy-in from local elected officials who really understand well how things have been going in that community and talk to each other frequently about it. That's a real key for making progress in any sort of thing. Getting multiple perspectives, sometimes by doing interviews and surveys, other sorts of things that get you outside that small team and get you kind of a wide range of views about how things are going. That's pretty important. Knowing the laws, obviously, as we've said, and then also kind of understanding, and I think several of us have mentioned this, understanding you can't do everything at once. You don't want to do everything. And so kind of presenting kind of a menu of different sorts of things to the elected officials, to the staff, to the community, and say, okay, which things seem most promising here? Which ones can we do now? Which ones do we really need to kind of build up toward? Which ones can we start in kind of a small, low key sort of way, see how they work, refine them so that when we get to the higher stakes sorts of things, that we've got something that we're confident in. Understanding that kind of process is important. Let me turn it over. Well, why don't you go back to the last one, and let's have Tracy and Carolyn, if they like, comment on the things that I just said or make other comments as well. And then let's see if we got some more things from the chat. Tracy or Carolyn? I can see you, Tracy. I can't. Oh, go ahead.
I was trying to defer to Carolyn, but I think she's working. Oh, it's okay. She's working to be unmuted.
It was not letting me unmute. It's like, we're talking about meaningful engagement, right? Let me unmute. Right. Let me unmute so I can speak. Matt, a lot of your comments remind me of just the notion that this work is sort of like campaigning, right? It's knowing what it is you're trying to accomplish. Who do you need to reach? Have you been inclusive in that outreach? And I know we think a lot about the structures for engagement, and some of those are organic. They don't have to be existing ones. Some of them are formal structures, boards and commissions, neighborhood associations are common ones that we use. But sometimes you also in government need to establish or create a body of folks to engage with. I'm also reminded in hearing all of the comments today that good and better public meetings they don't happen by accident. They're the product of a lot of planning each and every stage. I often used to say to my team in Indianapolis, especially when we had to make hard decisions and we wanted the public's input, we could either do that on the front end or we could do it on the back end. And it's always harder on the back end if you have not had the benefit of engaging with the public. Michelle Dennis, I think, put something in the comments about also the importance of letting the public know what you decided. Either way, otherwise it feels like nothing ever happened with that. And we know that sometimes it takes time at any level of government to make these decisions. But that feedback loop is so important to encourage folks to stay engaged the next time it happens. Again, I'm going to steal, when I leave this meeting today, I'm in the Inland Empire area of California, and I'm going to go into a meeting with 130 council members and mayors, and I can't wait to actually use some of these good ideas and these good strategies with them. So thank you, Matt, for the opportunity to comment.
Sure.
Great. This is awesome. And thank you, Carolyn. Thank you, Matt. This is really, like I said, I'm having fun. One of the things I want to uplift too is that we have a growing Latino population throughout this country. In our work with Love Your Block, we have funded over 50 cities since 2009. And as I travel the country to our grantee cities and meet with mayors and city staff, there's a growing Latino population in Pennsylvania and Jackson, Tennessee, and all these places that maybe you wouldn't believe. And so maybe your city's also experiencing that growth in Latino or other populations who don't speak English. And so one of the things to think about is, of course, language accessibility, both written documents and oral interpretation at public meetings, but also hiring staff that are bilingual, bicultural. Mayor Mendenhall in Salt Lake City on the west side is a large Latino community. And through our Love Your Block grant program, they hired a fellow, Chamali Hernandez. He was in the process of getting his master's degree. So he helped the mayor and her team uplift the Love Your Block grant program on the west side. It was, highly disinvested for many years, very low income. And Chamali, who just recently graduated with his master's, became that community liaison with the community that he grew up in. Again, bilingual, bicultural. And so when we say organizing the community, he was organizing his aunts and uncles, his tios and tias, his cousins, his neighbors. They knew him, they trusted him. And we installed him in City Hall. Mayor Mendenhall has recently offered him a full-time position as her civic engagement lead. And so that is another model to think about, that there are a lot of first-gen graduates in African-American, Latino, Asian Pacific Islander, Cambodian, Laos, the list can go on. So maybe in your city, there's a population that has historically not participated in public meetings. Again, language accessibility is one of many components, but a big one too is hire local. Find those young people who want to make their city better. And maybe they don't know that government is a place where they can go and work. And so you can open some doors for them, whether it be through a management fellowship or just specifically recruiting them to come and work on your teams. But let's think differently about our hiring practices so that we can onboard people who are trusted messengers in their community.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is another kind of area where the tech tools are much, much better than they were just very recently. And so, in terms of translation, like if you're trying to engage people through one sort of tech tool or another, those are easier to have in different languages than they were just a couple of years ago, thanks mainly to AI changes. But that's absolutely true. I mean, you want to engage people. Often you really need to go where they are, when they're there, and in ways and in a language that they use. Those kinds of engagement kind of things that work in engagement, are sometimes hard to think about only through the kind of lens of of the official public meetings, which are going to be, at City Hall, as school board, school system building at 7 o'clock on Tuesday or whatever. But you can, by kind of using those things in concert, can make a lot of headway. I also want to point out there's a great comment in the chat from Jacques in Oakland about a project there, which kind of is encouraging cooperation among different city departments, and also an inclusive engagement officer. There's a lot there. So check it out. And by the way, the chat will be part of the recording that we send to you all in the follow-up email. But a couple of things I want to call out from that example. One is it's an example of kind of collaboration between different departments within the institution, but within City Hall. And it's kind of a shame that we often find that that's not happening, that the planning and zoning people are not talking to the police or to the budget people or different parts of City Hall. They're all trying to engage the public separately, and they're not sharing notes or comparing notes or kind of joining their efforts. And within the community, there's very rarely collaboration between cities and school systems. The two biggest institutions in most communities usually are not collaborating in the way that they're interacting with the public, and that's a shame as well. There are other institutions which can be helpful, libraries, universities, all kinds of other chambers of commerce. The more that we understand that engagement is a cross-sector priority, that the more we can do it, the better we can do it, and that actually lifts up all of those organizations and all the things that they work on, the more we recognize that and act accordingly, the more efficient as well as effective it will be for us to do this kind of work well.
Yeah, just to jump in there, Linda, I mean, I think this ties into what Linda Redmond is saying. This part of this broader ecosystem of working in a place-based community development sense, so developing civic ambassadors, and in Boulder, they have community connectors. And so this idea of having, people that on the ground, ears on the ground that are working as segues, but potentially even having their own sorts of meetings that are spaces that are created by themselves that feed into official processes, not just only designing in the way that we want and inviting them, but allowing them to create their own spaces that are comfortable and feeding them into these official processes. I think also part of this conversation, because we're talking a lot about, making the relationships better within an official meeting, maybe there's also opportunities to think about making relationships better on the ground between elected officials and their constituents, whether it's on a ward-based or neighborhood level, and thinking about deliberative ways of having those, whether they're chats with council, they're deliberative town halls, or things of the like, could also be influential. So thinking about this entire ecosystem of on the ground and institutional, I think would contribute to that bigger picture.
Yeah, I think part of what we have heard, and not just in this project beforehand, that people want human connections. You talk to citizens and they say, I want to talk to my school board representative. I want to talk to my city councilman. They want kind of a more direct connection. When you ask the elected officials, what kinds of interactions do you most enjoy? Do you get most out of? They talk about the one-to-one conversations on the phone. They run into somebody at the grocery store. People come to their office or whatever. I mean, the people on all sides of this equation, people value that kind of first, direct sort of interaction. That's where they really feel heard. The problem, of course, is there's only so many hours of the day. If you're a city council member, you can't have a personal conversation with every one of your constituents, every week, because it's not possible. But with small groups where people are heard and kind of they're not actually all just talking to the city council member, but they're being heard by one another. Their feedback, their input is being aggregated, displayed, funneled into decision making. People, and then by kind of changing some of the public meetings so that they have more of that kind of basic human interaction in them, you can actually kind of satisfy some of those very, very, very real needs for people. And to reflect on the fact that everything we just said about how people feel heard is what doesn't happen in official public meetings. Those are in not human connection sorts of venues. So thinking about, well, what will make people feel gratified is always a kind of a key rule of thumb. We need to wrap up here in a second. Let me just see, are there other, coffee with the mayor? Absolutely. Those sorts of things. Walk the block, walk and talk with the city council member or the school board member through the school, around the neighborhood, those sorts of things. Basic, sorts of things. People really like those sorts of things. Let me just kind of wrap up here a couple ways. One is we want to thank the support of the AAA ICDR Foundation, which made this entire project possible. And this whole thing is kind of an extension of their interests in creating more human connections, creating settings in which people can actually tackle, the divisions that they have, the differences of opinion that they have in successful, productive, ways that kind of build their relationships. That whole philosophy is what we hope we're bringing into this work and into official public meetings of various kinds. So we're really grateful to have their support intellectually as well as in other ways throughout this entire project. Another thing to say is that we are doing this sort of work now, and this what we've been reporting on here is supported by the project, but we can be working, and we are working with other cities on these sorts of things. So please don't hesitate to contact us, democracyinnovation@ncl.org. And in one particular relatively easy way that we would love cities to work with us on is the scorecard. The scorecard we have is actually easy for us to adapt and use in other places. If you want to use it in your town, your city, just give us a call or an email, and we'll figure out how to set it up for you. And that way you can measure things, getting a baseline of how people are thinking about the meetings that you hold now, and also as you try new things or introduce new innovations, getting their feedback on those so that you can understand how to refine them, make them better, and also getting their sense of the community. Like I was saying earlier, it's important that people feel connected, informed, have a meaningful say in decisions they care about, and that their volunteerism is supported and honored. Those four things are tremendously important to all kinds of ways that the community can succeed. So the more that we can give people a chance to measure that, the better off we'll all be able to be, better off we are in terms of kind of trying new things and new innovations in our communities. So thank you all for joining us. You will be getting, if you registered, this follow-up email with the recording and the resources. Thank you so much, Carolyn and Tracy, for all of your wisdom and for your spending your afternoon with us, or morning for you, Carolyn. And thank you all, and hope to see you and hear from you all soon.